Good day everyone, I am Deborah Himarino and I will be reporting about Presidential Decree 1096 or also known as National Building Code of the Philippines. And in this report, you will be informed of the standard sizes, dimensions, and other specifications and standards of buildings, part of buildings, or anything that is related to constructing buildings in the Philippines. That all civil engineers, building planners, and constructors must apply to all their building works. So what is building code? Building code sets the performance standards that all building work must meet. It covers aspects such as structural stability, fire safety, access, durability, services, and facilities. Also, it states how a building must perform in its intended use rather than describing how the building must be designed and constructed. So, property owners can choose their designs, products, or building methods as long as the building consent application demonstrates that the proposal meets the building code requirements. For example, the building code specifies the minimum room openings of a residential bedroom, but it does not state how you must achieve that opening. The designs need to show how you would meet that requirement. So, this report will only cover Chapter 6 to Chapter 10 of the Building Codes. Chapter 6 is fire resistive requirements in construction. Chapter 7 is classification and general requirements of all buildings. Chapter 8 is about light and ventilation. Chapter 9 is about sanitation. And Chapter 10, building projection over public streets. So before we proceed to the main contents of this report, we will be answering this question. Why is it important for civil engineers to meet the specifications given in the building code? So, the main purpose of the building codes is to protect public health, safety, and general welfare as they relate to the construction and occupancy of building and structures. Building codes play an important role in maintaining safe communities. Also, building codes are minimum requirements that help safeguard the safety and welfare of all building occupants. The specification provides clear instruction on project intent, performance, and construction. It can reference the quality and standards which should be applied. Practicing the building codes in the construction will help avoiding harmful effects in the construction activities. So, next question. What happens if an engineer violates the building code? So, by law, the enforcement of local, state, and federal building codes is handled by the local building inspector. Their duties are to examine buildings under construction, review architectural design, plans for new buildings, and addition and compliance issues in existing structures. So, um, if it is proven that there is negligence in construction building, um, and it is proven that an engineer violates the code and it does not comply the specifications given in the code, the civil engineer may be on the hook for fines and an expensive tear out and redo of a certain project. So let's proceed to the main contents of this report. In Chapter 6, fire resistive requirements in construction. So um, in this in this section 601, the fire resistive rating is being defined. So what is resistive rating? So fire resistive rating is the degree to which a material can withstand fire. Okay, so the keyword there is the degree. And these ratings are being determined by generally recognized and accepted testing methods. Okay, chapter 602, let's define what is fire resistive time period rating. So this is the length of time a material can withstand without being burned. So which may be 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, or etc. So this refers to the length of time. For example, for 1 hour rating, this means that the material can withstand fire for 1 hour only. And same goes with 3 hour, 4 hour, and so on. So in section 603, fire resistive standards. So what are the standards of the fire resistive method? So all materials of construction and assemblies are or combination thereof shall be classified according to their fire retardant or flame spread ratings. So, as determined also, this is also determined by the generally accepted testing methods and or by the secretary or the building officials of the Philippines. So, section 604 is the fire resistive regulations. So, in this section, it states that the secretary shall prescribe standards and promulgate rules and regulation on the testing of construction materials for fire protection system. So we have also the Fire Code of the Philippines, which is a separate document that states all the standards and testing methods that should be followed um, in the in the Philippines when we talk about the fire safety. Okay, so talking about fire protection, so we have two fire protection systems defined as the active fire protection and the passive fire protection. So what is active fire protection? Active fire protection includes fire protection elements that need an action to function. So the action may be manual like an extinguisher or automatic like a sprinkler system. This system will help hold, empower, and stop a fire that has begun. So, how about the passive fire protection? So, passive fire protection is often not noticed, but it is a critical element in a fire protection. Passive fire protection consists of elements utilized to keep a building safe so that fire doesn't spread and no action is needed to it to work. So, passive fire protection systems are built inside the building. So, this usually consists of the fire resistant floors and walls. So let's move on to the chapter 7. So chapter 7 talks about the classification and general requirement of all buildings by use or occupancy. So before before we proceed, let us first know what are the classifications of buildings by occupancy. So um, there are different occupancy that a building has. So it can be group A, B, C until group J. So what is group A? Group A is for residential dwellings. Group B for residentials, hotels, and apartments. So group C, education and recreation. Group D, institutional. Group E, business and mercantile. Group F is industrial. Group H is assembly other than group I, and Group I is assembly occupant load of 1,000 or more, and Group J is for accessory buildings. So, is it allowed to change the occupancy use of a building? So, what does it mean? So, it means that um, when a certain building has a certain occupancy, is it allowed to change that occupancy to another one? For example, group A to group J. So section 702 states that no change shall be made in the character of occupancy or use of any building which would place the building in a different division of the same group or of occupancy or in different group of occupancy unless such building is made to comply with the requirements of this code for such division or group of occupancy. So this means that if a building is designed to be residential, it should be it should function as a residential building. It should not function as a industrial or mercantile or accessory building. So, but however, if a change must be is so needed to be applied in the building, it should comply the requirements given by the secretary or the building officials. So next is for mixed occupancy in section 703. So what is mixed occupancy? So there are different subcategories under the mixed occupancy or section 703. First is the general requirements. So the general requirement is that the whole building shall be subject to the most restrictive requirement pertaining to any type of the occupancy. Okay, so it would be possible to mix the occupancy of the building. When a one-story building houses more than one occupancy, each portion of the building shall conform to the requirement of the particular occupancy. So for example, there is a building and there are different parts with different occupancy. So each parts of that building must meet their respective requirements with respect to the occupancy that they have. And also, where minor accessory uses do not comply more than 10% of the area of any floor of a building, nor more than 10% of the basic area permitted in the occupancy requirements, in which case the major use of the building shall determine the occupancy classification. So it simply states that if the majority of the building functions in the same occupancy, so that occupancy will govern in the design and in the requirements set by the secretary. So forms of occupancy separation. So form the occupancy separation can be vertical or horizontal or both. And for the types of occupancy separation, we have 1R fire resistive, 2R fire resistive, 3R fire resistive, 4R and 4R fire resistive. So it only refers to the previously discussed fire resistive rating. Okay, so fire rating for occupancy separation. So fire rating where any occupancy separation is required, the minimum shall be a 1R fire resistive occupancy. So if different part of a building is adjacent to one another part of the building that has another occupancy, there must be a separation between them, and that separation should have a minimum fire rating of 1R fire resistive occupancy separation. Okay, so next is section 704. It is the location on property. So in general, there has to be a direct access of a public space, yard, or street on at least one of its sides. So a property must have direct access to public space. Eaves of over required windows shall not be less than 750 millimeters from the side and rear property line. So what is eaves? So eaves are the border of the roof. So the border of the roof and the property line, the distance must not be less than 750 millimeters. Okay, so resistance of firewalls. So exterior walls shall have fire resistance and opening protection. So when openings in exterior walls are required to be protected due to distance from property line, the sum of the areas of such opening in any story shall not exceed 50% of the total area of the wall in that story. So next is also under the location and property, buildings on same property and buildings containing courts. So if ever there is you will be designing these types of buildings on the same property and court walls shall be assumed to have a property line between them. So it should have a clear you should have a clear property line on your property, and to set a clear separation to the property beside your property. Okay, so next is section 705, the allowable floor areas. So the allowable floor areas depends on the occupancy and types of buildings. So it is set by the secretary, and also the allowable floor area increases according to the building code. This should also comply to the requirements of the secretary. And in section 707, the maximum height of buildings. So the maximum height should be of buildings shall be 3 meters, but it has an exception, except that for towers, spires, and steeples erected as part of the building and not used for habitation or storage are limited as to height only by structural design if completely of incombustible materials, or may extend not to exceed 6 meters above the height limits of for each occupancy group if of combustible materials. So it simply states that if it's not a habitation or storage, you can exceed your maximum height, your building height according to your structural design, provided that it should be made of combustible materials as given in the code. Okay, so Section 708 is the minimum requirements for Group A dwellings. So Group A dwellings are the most commonly used, or um, the majority of the construction in the Philippines is about Group A dwellings or the residential. So we should know the minimum requirements for it. So dwelling location and lot property. This should be less than 90% of a corner lot, less than 80% of an inside lot. For easements or setbacks, there should be at least 2 meters from the property line. Okay, so for the light and ventilation, we will discuss that more on chapter 8. For sanitation, there should be at least one sanitary toilet and adequate washing and drainage facilities. For the foundations, at least 250 millimeters thick and 600 millimeters below the surface of the ground. For the post, each post shall be anchored to such footing by traps and bolts of adequate size. And for the floors, the first floor live load must be at least 200 kg per meter squared, and the second floor live load is at least 150 kg per meter squared. Next is for the roof. Roof wind load should be designed to be at least 100 to resist at least 120 kilogram per meter squared. Or it should be vertical projection. Next is the stairs. So for the stairs, the clear width of the stairs must be at least 750 millimeter. The rise must be 200 millimeters, and the run must be at least 200 millimeters. So for the entrance and the exit, so there should be at least one entrance and another one for exit. So also for electrical requirements, we have the Philippine Electrical Code, and for mechanical requirements, we have Philippine Mechanical Engineering Code. So that ends chapter 7. So let's proceed to chapter 8 talks about the light and ventilation. Okay, so for section 801, or the general requirements, we should provide the adequate light and ventilation of the buildings, and also all buildings shall face a street or public alley or private street which has been duly approved. Section 802 is talk about the measurement of site occupancy. It simply tells us that the occupancy is measured at the ground level. And for section 803, it is the percentage of site occupancy. The minimum site occupancy shall be governed by the use, type of construction, and height of the building, and the use, area, nature, and location of the site. And for section 804, it talks about the size and dimension of courts. And the minimum horizontal dimension of courts shall be not less than 2 meters, and all inner courts shall be connected to a street or yard either by a passageway with a minimum width of 1.2 meters or by a door through a room or rooms. Next is section 805. This is about ceiling heights. So for buildings with artificial ventilation, the habitable rooms must have minimum ceiling height of 2.4 meter. For more than one story, the first story must be minimum of 2.7 meters. The second story must be minimum of 2.4 meters, and the succeeding stories must have a minimum ceiling height of 2.1 meter. For buildings with natural ventilation, it should have a minimum of 2.7 meters ceiling height. For mezzanine floors are low ceiling story, so it should have minimum of 1.8 meter above and below its floor. So for section 806, the size and dimension of rooms. So rooms with human habitation must be 6 square meters with at least dimension of 2 meters. So for kitchens, 3 square meters with at least 1.5 meters. For bath and toilet, it should be 1.2 square meters with a list dimension of 0.9 meters. So these are the minimum standards. So you can exceed the area of these rooms, but you can never go below this area. So for Section 807, it is airspace requirements in determining size of rooms. So for number 1, for school rooms, it should be 3 cubic meters with 1 square meter on floor area per person. Okay, for number 2, workshops, factories, and offices, 12 cubic meters of airspace per person. And habitable rooms, 14 cubic meters of airspace per person. For Section 808, or the window openings, so if artificial ventilation is not provided, window openings shall have a total free area of at least 10% of the floor area of a room. So this is for buildings where artificial ventilation is not provided. So next is for Section 809, or this talk about the vent shops. Okay, so the minimum cross-sectional area is 0.1 square meter for every meter of height of shaft. Must not be less than 1 square meter. The minimum dimension must be 600 millimeters. Okay, so for Section 810, or the ventilation skylights, the skylights shall have a glass area not less than that required of the windows that are replaced. They shall be equipped with removable sashes or louvers with an aggregate net free area not less than the required for opening parts of the window that are replaced or provided with approved artificial ventilation of equivalent effectiveness. So for Section 811, the artificial ventilation. So rooms or spaces housing industrial or heating equipment shall be provided with artificial means of ventilation to prevent excessive accumulation of hot and or polluted air. Okay, so that ends chapter 8. So moving on to chapter 9, or the sanitation. Okay, so for Section 901, or the general requirements, it states that all buildings hereafter erected, altered, remodeled, relocated, or repaired for human habitation shall be provided with adequate sanitation. For Section 902, the water supply system. So where should we get the water supply for our buildings? So the potable water shall be supplied from existing municipal or city waterworks system. And also, the quality of drinking water from meteoric, surface, or underground sources shall conform to the criteria set in the latest approved national standards for drinking water. Also, the design, construction, and operation of deep wells for the abstraction of groundwater shall be subject to the provision of the Water Code of the Philippines. The design, construction, and operation of independent waterworks systems, private housing, subdivisions, or industrial estates shall be governed by existing laws relating to local waterworks system. And the water piping installation inside buildings and premises shall conform to the provisions of the National Plumbing Code of the Philippines. Okay, for Section 903, the wastewater disposal system. Okay, the wastewater shall be discharged directly into the nearest street sanitary sewer. And all buildings located in areas where there are no available sanitary sewerage system shall dispose their sewage off or septic tank and subsurface absorption field. Okay, so it is an alternative if the municipal street sewer is not available. Okay, for sanitary and industrial plumbing installation inside buildings and premises, it shall conform to the provisions of the National Plumbing Code. Okay, Section 904 is the storm drainage system. So, rainwater drainage shall not discharge to the sanitary sewer. So, for Section 905, the pest and vermin control. So, all buildings with hollow and wood construction shall be provided with rat proofing. And also, garbage bins and receptacles shall be provided with ready means for cleaning and with positive protection against entry of pests and vermins. And also for dining rooms for public use without artificial ventilation, it shall be properly screened. And for Section 906, the noise pollution control, industrial and establishments shall be provided with positive noise abatement devices to tone down the noise level of equipment and machineries to accept limits set down by the Department of Labor and the National Pollution Control Commission. Okay, for Section 907, the pipe materials. So, all pipe materials to be used in buildings shall conform to the standard specifications of the Philippine Standard Council. Okay, so that ends Chapter 9. So, let's proceed to Chapter 10, or the building projections over public streets. So, for Section 1001, the general requirements is that no part of any building or structure or any of its appendages shall project beyond the property line of the building site. So, dapat dili jud mo lapas sa property line ang sa building. So, for Section 1002, projection into alleys or streets. So, footings located at least 2.4 meters below grade along national roads or public highway may project not more than 300 millimeters beyond the property line. Okay, so for Section 1003, projection of balconies and appendages over streets. So, the extent of any projection over an alley or street shall be uniform within a block. Okay, the clearance between the established grade of the street and or sidewalk and the lowest under the surface of any part of the balcony shall not be less than 3 meters. Okay, so next is for the arcades. So whenever required, the existing building and zoning regulation, the arcade shall be constructed on sidewalks or streets. Okay, so the arcade shall not be less than 3 meters above the established sidewalk grade. Okay, so for Section 1005, or the canopies or the marquees, so what are the canopies? So it is defined in under the definition in Section 1005, a canopy or marquee is a permanent roof structure above a door attached to and supported by the building and projected over a wall or sidewalk. This includes any object or decoration attached thereto. So this picture is an example of a marquee. Okay, so projection and clearance. So the horizontal clearance between the outermost edge of the marquee and the curb line shall not be less than 300 millimeters. And also, it must be made of incombustible materials. And also, the location of it, every marquee should be located as to not to interfere with the operation of any exterior standpipe connection or to obstruct the clear passage from the stairway exits of the building or the installation or maintenance of electroliers. Okay, so the next is Section 1006, movable awnings or hoods. So the awning is a movable shelter supported entirely from the exterior wall of the building and of type which can be retracted, folded, or collapsed against the face of the supporting building. So this is an example of an awning or hoods. Okay, so the horizontal clearance between the awning and the curb line shall not be less than 300 millimeters, and the vertical clearance between the undermost surface of the awning and the pavement of ground line shall not be less than 2.4 meters. And collapsible awnings shall be so designated that they shall not block a required exit when collapsed or folded. Okay, so Section 1008 is for corner buildings with chaflans. Okay, so what are chaflans? So this is the picture of a chaflan. So it is a like a fillet of the building that it is common in the corner building, the buildings that are located in corner lots. Okay, every corner building or solid fence on a public street or alley should be less than 3.6 meters in width, shall be shall be truncated at the corner. Okay, so that ends my report about the chapter 6 to 10 of the National Building Code of the Philippines. So I hope that you have learned something, and thank you so much for listening.